Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Strengthening Existing and Facilitating New Vision Zero Plans. Before I introduce our presenters, I would like to cover just a few housekeeping topics. First of all, please make sure you are muted throughout the session. Next, we encourage questions. All questions will be addressed after the presentations are over. Please submit your questions in the chat box. If you think of a question for the speakers at any point, just type it in there and I will hold it for the discussion portion. Today's session is being recorded. HSRC will make the recording available at a later date, and we welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with colleagues. Today's presenters are Dr. Kelly Evenson, Department of Epidemiology, UNC-Chapel Hill, and Seth LaJeunesse, UNC Highway Safety Research Center. I'm going to hand the floor over to Seth, who is going to start today's presentation.
Thanks, Jennifer. And welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning for UNC Research Week's kickoff. As you know, as you may well know, we're here to talk about Vision Zero in the US. In particular, what Vision Zero is, where it's happening, and how communities are planning for it. This is something that Kelly and I have been studying and thinking about for a few years now as part of this Collaborative Sciences Center for Road Safety. Really look forward to sharing some of the findings with you today. So we are going to kind of discuss what is it by Vision Zero, for those not familiar with that. I know a lot of the people on the call today are quite familiar with this. The knowledge of Vision Zero in the US. What exactly are we talking about with respect to the awareness of those in sectors that are working in traffic safety? Some Vision Zero plans and the content of those plans. This is some Kelly will talk about, as well as Vision Zero implementation in the US. And then we'll take it to end on North Carolina's Vision Zero efforts. So what is Vision Zero? According to our friends at the Vision Zero Network, it really is a strategy to eliminate all traffic fatalities and serious injuries, while also promoting these other goals of safe, healthy, equitable mobility for everyone. So the key distinction here with other safety programming is that this is not necessarily a program to eliminate crashes, but to eliminate that serious and fatal injury on our roadways. It was introduced in Sweden. The lore has it in sort of the mid-90s and has spread across Europe since then. And in about the past 6 or 7 years, it's been happening in the United States, not only in major American cities, but as we will discuss today, in medium and even smaller locations as well. So very heartening to see that this sort of effort. In really trying to understand the philosophy of Vision Zero, a few of us as part of the Collaborative Science Center, you see there at the bottom of this research report here, the other universities as part of this consortium. We worked with our colleagues at Florida Atlantic University, Eric Dunbar and Louis Merlin, to really understand what some of the key principles are in the Vision Zero space. And we had seen that there's really 4 common principles across these early adopting European countries. Is this acknowledgement that the human body has known and limited ability to tolerate crash forces. So this is really about biology meets physics. We understand when people are struck by a motor vehicle going a certain speed, that they probably can't tolerate that. Their body just simply can't, and it breaks down. So that, how do we manage speeds then, right? How do we manage that kinetic energy transfer that happens between motor vehicles or between people and motor vehicles? We know that people make really common mistakes that lead to road crashes. These are things that often are embedded in the environment in which people travel through, and we can design those out, a lot of them. And this is something inherent in the concept of the self-explaining roadways that our European colleagues have been working on for several decades now. We're starting to see more of that practice being implemented in our guidance stateside, but we'd love to see that more readily applied. The third one, the system designers share responsibility with road users for crash prevention, really is thinking of systems designers more holistically. These are people that not only design roadways, but also that develop land use policies like minimum parking requirements or building setbacks. People that design vehicles as well. So all of these designers share responsibility with the safety of people using the roads. And then of course, the last one is critical to sort of a safe system. All elements of the system should be strengthened to multiply their effects. So those who are using the roads, designing the roadways and land uses and vehicles, all should work together, develop sort of cross sectoral goals around this so that their efforts are multiplied. Let's see, advance, yeah. So the motivation for Vision Zero in the US, it really started about a decade ago from our readings of this. It's often pegged to sort of this acknowledgement that from other high-income countries, the US is really pulling away, and not in a good way. We all in the late 60s, early 70s, we had seen sort of our peak crashes, our peak fatalities on the roadways. But since then, our European colleagues have really improved road user safety and driven those numbers down. Whereas the US, we have seen some gains, but we have not seen the gains that our European colleagues have seen. And this is true, especially as it relates to what some call vulnerable road users, people who walk or bike. These are also the groups that the cities tend to focus on that have adopted Vision Zero. You can see here this recent paper from just last month from Buehler and Puker looks at sort of the trend. They looked at from 1990 to just a couple of years ago. We see this trend downward in other places, particularly Germany, Denmark, the Netherlands. And you see that we are basically, in the last decade, we have seen an uptick. You might be familiar with this, fatalities among pedestrians and cyclists. So per capita, we have more people dying on the roads. In fact, it's about 5 times what it is in the Netherlands, for instance. So what are we to do about this? One of the things we try to understand is to what extent people are even aware that Vision Zero is a thing, is a construct that we can eliminate fatal and serious injury on our roadways. We did a survey a couple of years ago, Kelly, myself, and a few of our colleagues, and we found that there was really high knowledge and awareness of Vision Zero among the planning and engineering professions. Other sectors that are involved in Vision Zero in cities in the US, like law enforcement and EMS, as well as public health, they're at about 3/4 at that time. Awareness, no doubt, is higher now. Among the US Census, we saw the highest awareness in the South and the Northeast, a little less in the West, and in the Midwest, we saw even less. We definitely promoted it in our discussion in this paper that we do more promotion among certain sectors and in different, in the Midwest in particular. Among those who had heard of Vision Zero, so quite a few, again, had heard about it. About 42% of them worked at a municipality with a Vision Zero campaign. 41 did not. The rest did not know if they had a Vision Zero campaign locally. Those who did work in a municipality with Vision Zero, more than half of them were participating in the campaign, which we thought was interesting, where the other half had not. So the awareness is high, participation is a little lower, but that we had seen this after just a couple of years. Vision Zero really was spreading pretty rapidly in the US. And that begged the question, though, it does seem to be spreading pretty rapidly. How do we accelerate, though, the adoption of Vision Zero in the US and in North Carolina? One strategy comes from the diffusion of innovations and basically designing for diffusion. One strategy to do that is to identify who are opinion leaders in this space. So these are people, organizations, and municipalities that have professional influence in road safety. So we asked people, we did a survey where we asked people in law enforcement, public health, EMS, planning, engineering, these sorts of fields, and said, who do you look to for advice? What kind of people, organizations, and cities do you look to for advice on road safety? And they selected up to 3 in each of those categories. And we were able to use some modeling and social networking software to identify basically places where there is a high degree of professional influence. And we saw that from on a rank order, New York City by far and away was a major opinion leader. And then Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, Minneapolis, DC, and Boston. So what's interesting about this is that we're able to identify them through this procedure. In the next slide, I'll show you that they do in fact have Vision Zero programming in these places, but that because so many people, so many professionals working locally are looking to these cities, what matters in these cities, or it really does matter what happens in these cities. So what San Francisco or Seattle or New York does has an outsized influence on the system itself. So that's one of the things we're exploring in this research is how can we work more closely with these places to really accelerate the adoption of effective practice. So our friends at the Vision Zero Network are really helping sort of coordinate a lot of these efforts across the country. And one of the things they provide here is this map that shows places that really have made a commitment to realize a Vision Zero future. So these are places that have set goals about eliminating serious and fatal injury on the roadways. They have some type of political commitment from the top. They have a plan or strategy in place, and they have key city departments that are engaged, like public health, transportation, and law enforcement. So with that, I'm going to transition it over to my colleague Kelly, and she's going to be talking about the planning efforts in cities across the country.
Thank you, Seth. And we'll take questions at the end. Please feel free to put them in the chat if you wish. So the map that the Vision Zero Network made, as Seth just described, not all of those places have what we call a Vision Zero plan. And our group was interested in where the plans might exist and the content of them, because ideally a community with a Vision Zero plan, and particularly a high quality plan, should be more successful in reducing serious traffic crashes and deaths. And so what is a plan? A Vision Zero plan is a public document that provides the vision for future efforts for Vision Zero to reduce traffic fatalities and serious injuries. Each plan is unique and tailored to the community, creating variation between plans. So not every plan is the same. Each one should be unique. The plan should include the community's vision and goals, and it is ideally developed through a participatory process. The vision and goals should be supported by current and past conditions for safety. For example, many plans provide maps of past injuries and crashes. And then the plans should review existing policies, ordinances, and programs, because those are places that they can intersect with overlapping goals for their own Vision Zero efforts. And then finally, a plan should include information on implementation, including a timeline and evaluation. You don't have to switch the slide yet, Seth. So what do we know about Vision Zero plans? There's actually little guidance to communities on how to develop a high quality plan. But we do know from other planning efforts, certain elements that should be included. And we were interested in whether those elements were in the plans that were being developed and whether they might make a difference. And my motivation came from work I did about 10 years ago studying North Carolina bike and pedestrian plans. And so when I learned about Vision Zero, that was really my interest coming into it, was what the planning effort happening and particularly in the plans. So next slide. I will say though, we know that Vision Zero can happen without a formal plan. And these are just two different examples where communities have resolutions and smaller action plans to guide their work. They don't have a formal overarching Vision Zero plan. Next slide. So our first step in this part of the process was to complete an inventory of all Vision Zero plans. So we worked to collect those across the US. And then for the plans that we found, we go through a process to get approval to actually post the plan in a central location. And that way it's very easy for someone to find in what we call the Dataverse. And so far to date, we found 48 plans as well as 2 updates. By far, the most is among municipalities. We found 40 municipal plans, 3 county plans, 2 regional, and then more recently in Florida, we found some MPO RPO plans, so Metropolitan Planning Organization. Next slide. So I've mapped it for you here. So this is the locations of the municipal plans, and you'll notice there's definitely some spatial aggregation, some spatial association. So once a place has a Vision Zero, and particularly a plan, it interests communities around it. And that's particularly true in California. And then on the next slide, just to be able to fit it in, Anchorage, Alaska also has a Vision Zero plan, and definitely don't want to forget them. The next slide actually lists the communities. If you have a community that you're interested in, you can quickly look on this list. And Portland is in red because they actually have updated their Vision Zero plan. And then on the next slide are the regional, county, and district plans. And Montgomery County has recently updated their plan. Next slide. This shows the Dataverse, and the link is long, but if you're interested in seeing some of these plans, if you just type in Vision Zero plans and Dataverse, it will come up on the first page of Google searching. And so far, these are most communities that we've asked have given us permission to post their plan here. And so it makes it a lot easier to skim through plans by looking here at our library. Next slide. So Seth plotted this for us. This is looking at just cities with at least 100,000 population. So there are 314 of those, and whether they have a Vision Zero plan. And based on diffusion of innovation theory, we know that theory helps us explain how over time an idea gains momentum and is diffused. And so the innovators, the first to try this in the US, were places like New York City and Seattle. And then we have early adopters, which represent the opinion leaders that Seth mentioned. And so we are already at about 10% of those 314 cities, larger cities, that have a Vision Zero plan. And then after the early adopters, and that happens at about 15%, then comes the early majority, the late majority, and the laggards, and we're not quite there yet for them. Now, certainly if we had a graphic for the smaller communities, below 100,000 population, we're still in the early adopter phase there. Next slide. So the next step was to understand what the elements were in those Vision Zero plans that we collected. So we created a very detailed abstraction tool that took several hours to complete. And we applied that to the first set of plans, the first 23 plans in the US. So the coding process that we trained on several plans to gain consistency across our team. And then the plan was coded and a second reviewer checked all of the coding, and any differences were resolved by consensus. And then we input the information into a software called Qualtrics for analysis. And I'll just show you on the next few slides just a couple of the results. So from the first 26 plans, the earliest publication 2014, that's New York City. And we analyzed the first 26 all the way through early 2018. So most of the plans included maps of severe and fatal crashes, 20 of the 26, but you see that describing history of stakeholder involvement, how they got to where they were to developing a plan, only 8 of those describe that history. We would like to see plans that include a public participation process. There were 4 of them that presented that in detail. 12 mentioned it, but not in detail, and 10 did not mention it at all. Next slide. 23 of those plans did have a vision statement. And of those, 18 set a year when they were going to accomplish essentially Vision Zero. And you can see there at the bottom, the years to accomplish Vision Zero. 3 of them were between 2020 to 24, and then 9 of them went all the way out to 2030 to 2035 for accomplishing 0 traffic fatalities. In terms of clear statement of goals, 13 of the plans linked goals to measurable outcomes, which we would want to see. 9 of the plans had goals, but were not linked to measurable outcomes. And then 4 plans had no specific goals. And then I actually went back and did a detailed examination of what goals were described, what overarching goals were described among the plans. And of course, almost all of them have goals related to eliminating traffic fatalities. But there were 15 of them that also had other types of goals, and we'll look at those on the next slide. So that goals may be around enforcement, education, engineering, creating a culture of safety, engagement, equity, and encouragement. And then there were even other goals specific to communities, for example, around drunk driving or graduated licensing. Next slide. This slide shows the different partners that were mentioned within the plans. And law enforcement by far was the #1 partner, but then you can see on the slide other important partners in this effort. Next slide. So from what we did in terms of the examination of the plans, we realized our next important step would be to develop a guide to help those who are either communities that are developing Vision Zero plans, or if they wish to update their plan. We developed a guide to try to help them through that process. And we also picked out good examples for different aspects of plans that we could highlight within our guide. And this guide was recently published and is available online for download. Next slide. And the guide is organized around 4 sections involving the community, how to write up the section on analyzing current conditions, the next section on developing metrics to evaluate, and then finally an implementation process and evaluation. Next slide. So from this, we were interested in really the extent of Vision Zero beyond just plans and across the US. And so we went back a few months ago, we started this effort where we went back and developed a survey to search every municipality in the US to find if they were engaging in Vision Zero based on what they have on their website. And if they were, whether they had a plan. And for the communities that were at least 100,000 in population size, we went into a very detailed abstraction about where they might be in the implementation process. And so we are just finishing that effort. It actually finishes today, which is ironic. So a longer survey for the 314 larger municipalities, and then a shorter one for the 474. And then from that information, we are planning to select communities to interview, both communities with a Vision Zero plan and those without, to see how they're planning without the formal plan, how that works. And then also to understand whether what we assessed from their website in terms of implementation actually matches with what they're doing. But this really will give us a look in the year 2020 at what's happening with Vision Zero in a systematic way, which is exciting. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it back to Seth to really now go into more detail about what's happening in North Carolina.
Thanks so much, Kelly. And thanks so much for hanging with us thus far today, everybody. Just want to pause for a second to recognize that several folks have asked really, really great questions in the chat. So Kelly, I wonder if we can just take a minute here to maybe address some of these. Looks like Sarah O'Brien noted that she's noticed that enforcement agencies have historically been involved in Vision Zero efforts. With the current conversations happening around the country today, and specifically in these key influencer cities like New York, Portland, how is the role of law enforcement in Vision Zero changing? Kelly, I don't know if there's anything from the planning abstraction that you've noticed. And again, what I know is more anecdotal, but happy to. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, and I mentioned it in the presentation, that law enforcement is most commonly involved in Vision Zero efforts for those first 26 plans.
Right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, we definitely have spoken with people in New York and Portland, and it does seem that right now they are investigating or examining ways that they could maybe have a bit of less of a role for law enforcement, looking maybe toward automated enforcement where possible as well. Stephen asked about the emergence of regional county MPO plans. Have we seen any coordination in those plans with municipalities if they're both doing Vision Zero? And Kelly's nodding yes.
Yeah, Stephen, that's a good question. We are looking at that, and actually the MPO plans, there was only one that we abstracted because the other two have happened more recently, so they were after our abstraction. But we are trying to look at whether they're coordinating. It's interesting, some municipalities within those MPOs say, yes, we're part of a Vision Zero effort, and they're connected to their MPO plan, whereas others, we can't find any mention of it. And so it seems like they're not as connected. So it goes both. We've seen examples both ways.
Yeah, and related to this, Leah Sham with the Vision Zero Network has posted a great link here to MPOs creating Vision Zero plans and goals. So there's a link in the chat from Leah regarding this. Basically, Jennifer wants to know if we can say a little bit more about, how we drew between an action plan and a full-blown plan. So I suppose the distinction would be an action plan would be focusing mostly on implementation, whereas a full-blown plan might get in more into the background, public participation process, that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. Have vision, goals, assess current conditions. It's a much more in-depth look from beginning to end, and it subsumes an action plan within it, I would say.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we had seen this interesting framing around planning. A lot of them do call them action plans. But some of the ones that are called action plans, we actually might call a plan. It is more comprehensive than say just an action plan. Not to say just an action plan, but
we actually look at the plan to make an assessment of whether it fits our definition of plan or not. And sometimes it takes some round robin communication to discern that. So it's a great question.
So Lewis, who we with Eric, we worked with on the principles from our European colleagues around safe systems and Vision Zero. He's wondering if we assess whether the plans reflect the 4 safe systems principles, and those being listed on the CSER's website. I don't know. Lewis, I'll speak. I don't believe we're looking at those in particular, more indirectly, not in the ways that we frame safe systems. Kelly, is that about right? It's mostly what comprises those principles.
Yeah, we did abstract around safe systems. And I will say that was probably the hardest area of our abstraction, was trying to abstract whether they addressed safe system principles. I'm sure we do overlap with the 4, but we didn't write our abstraction directly to link to those 4. But we do have a section on that, and we're actually going back through and rechecking all of our abstractions around safe systems, because it is challenging to get at those. But Lewis, if you're interested, you can reach out and email me. I'd be happy to share, what we did abstract on that.
Wonderful. I think we could probably take one more question before we move on, then we can address everyone else's. These are really awesome, so thank you. Serge asks, is it realistic to set an actual time frame for achieving 0 deaths? Serge, it's a great question. It's something actually that's been discussed since Vision Zero sort of arrived in the US. Oslo, Norway in 2019 did actually achieve 0 deaths, and the ITE, or the Institute for Transportation Engineers, they recently sponsored a webinar on this very subject about how Norway and Oslo had achieved that. So it is more of a sort of a moral question. What should be a sort of ethical goal around death on the roads, right? The goal should certainly be 0. Now, setting a timeline on that is probably more difficult. And as you can see from what Kelly had shown with the plans, the timeline differs across municipalities. We're not entirely sure when we might be able to achieve this, but certainly we should be devoting resources toward that end. Kelly, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to add.
Yeah, it is a laudable goal, maybe more attainable in some places than others. I just want to go back maybe before you start again, Seth. Leah responded to my answer, surprised to hear law enforcement most involved in the early plans. When we went through every partner that was listed in each of those 26 plans and coded them as yes, no. And so when we did that across the plans, law enforcement was most often mentioned. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they're the driving partner of the partnership, but in terms of any sector, any department, they were the #1 in terms of being mentioned in the Vision Zero effort. Okay, I'll go on mute, Seth, and turn it back to you.
Okay, fair enough. So thank you everyone for these wonderful questions. Well, we'll pick that back up at the end here. But I just wanted to sort of touch base about where we stand and where we're headed in North Carolina, given that not all of us, but most of us on the call today, this is where we live and work. So we've been fortunate enough to work with the Governor's Highway Safety Program on this the Vision Zero program in North Carolina for the past year. That includes myself, Stephen Heine, Allison West, and Kristen Blank. We're all at the HSRC. And we also join our friends at NC State's ITRI with respect to data visualization and basically promotion of Vision Zero. One of the key strategies we use is, again, going back to this diffusion of innovations, is really trying to understand some of the key partners in road safety in North Carolina, identify where opinion leaders reside, where they work, and then thinking through providing a bit of a menu of options that are going to work in North Carolina in terms of roadway interventions. And then, of course, this evidence-based guidance on implementing Vision Zero. So we can adopt it and say that we're going to do it, but how do we actually start implementing what we mean by safe systems in Vision Zero? And these are just the communities right now in North Carolina that are engaged with us in this effort, have formed sort of a statewide coalition around that, and are doing Vision Zero in their communities. Let's see here. So one of the tasks, similar to what we had done on a national scale, we applied to North Carolina, is we asked people, hey, who do you look to for advice in road safety? The people and the organizations they work in. And we found that these opinion leaders really concentrated quite a bit in Raleigh, as you can see there. Pretty much everyone was looking to people in Raleigh, in and around the Raleigh metro area. And then we have Charlotte as well. They have a robust Vision Zero program. Durham, sort of an early adopter in North Carolina. And then Asheville, particularly among our Western partners, looking to them. So with that, we can draw upon who should we be working with more closely, propping up and highlighting their best practice. In terms of implementation, we're fortunate at UNC to be on a campus with a great deal of resources and research in implementation science. So we were able to very quickly sort of gather on active implementation frameworks, apply that to Vision Zero, and share that out with our Vision Zero communities I showed earlier. So we've created this implementation milestones checklist. So basically communities could do a bit of a self-assessment as to where they were in implementing, knowing full well that complete or full implementation is going to take about 2 to 4 years. This is usually, and it might even take a little bit longer given how many sectors that need to be engaged in the coalition for Vision Zero. But broke it down into kind of 4 stages or phases: exploration, installation, initial implementation, and then full implementation. We found that at the time, most Vision Zero communities in North Carolina were in that exploration or installation phase. And by exploration, we mean we're really starting to think through who are some of our partners in this effort. Who's really going to be pushing for this in different sectors, right? So we're talking about planning and engineering, people that work in affordable housing, people that work in public health and injury prevention, work with EMS, emergency response, people that work in law enforcement, people who work in policy. Doing a bit of a systems-oriented needs and assets assessment, and then getting maybe some support, maybe a local resolution or policy around Vision Zero. And then installation, we started seeing places like Greensboro, Durham, Charlotte, developing these Vision Zero plans. So this is what we're starting to see as installation. This is where they're starting to hire staff devoted to Vision Zero strategies. This is where they're maybe devoting money to this and funding. And then propping up a performance management system. As Kelly had said, the Vision Zero guide that we developed really gets into this with how do you start measuring it and understanding to what extent you're making a difference. And then as you get through the stages, you start really getting into more proceduralizing. So you're onboarding people, they're getting right into the fold very quickly, understanding exactly what Vision Zero is and what role that they play within the broader system. And then getting into maintenance and full operation. So you've implemented half of your plan, you're maintaining this performance management system, you have onboarding procedures for new partners, these sorts of things. So that checklist is available for download if you're interested. This next one is we thought was pretty cool. So this is Vision Zero safety procedures. What we kind of framed this around is that this is a menu of different interventions that can be proceduralized, that can be applied in a lot of different places or in a lot of different procedures. So we had developed a list of about 14 or 15 interventions that we thought we knew from the research worked really well in terms of reducing injury. And then we reached out to 12 of our colleagues around the state that are working mostly in engineering, planning, public health positions, and said, imagine yourself pitching this intervention or this procedure in front of your town or city council. Would they balk at you? Would they support it? What would their reaction be like? And so based upon that, and averaged across those 12 people, we were able to identify interventions and procedures that were both really effective and had political viability. So this makes it so that they have some choice in selecting among these, and they know at least to have some sense of the fact that this is has a potential to be implemented in their community. So these are just some examples. We ended up with 8 of them. And again, if you're interested in these safety procedures, you could visit that PDF there and download these. So, but where are we headed? So this last year was focused on really diffusing the practice. We really wanted to get Vision Zero in more places across the state. Now we're doing the same, but we're adding on to this. We're really taking a deeper dive into safe systems in Vision Zero. So as part of that, we are really gratified to be working more closely with our colleagues at the Injury Prevention Research Center at UNC on really incorporating systems thinking and systems science, change management, along with safe systems and Vision Zero principles to really start changing sort of the culture around safety in municipalities across North Carolina. So this is sort of our team makeup. We're going to be engaging with Vision Zero communities through coaching. This is going to be happening on a monthly basis. This is more active listening and problem solving kind of coaching. We'll have a 3-day intensive training institute where they'll really think through some of these systems thinking principles, really understand the nature, the unfolding nature of their problems in terms of traffic safety, and then providing this regular support, both within and between the municipalities. They do see each other as a resource, and we were there to fill a sort of core facilitator role. So just some examples of what we mean by each of these we'll be focusing. So as you can see earlier here, we have these different cores, as we're calling them. Within each core, we have these different points of contact around identifying evidence-based Vision Zero strategies, for instance, or developing Vision Zero action plans. One of the things that we discovered on a recent call with all the Vision Zero communities was on the bottom there, conducting community assessments. So this is where it's really speaking to sort of community leaders in different sectors to understand, to get a sense of to what extent is traffic safety discussed? Is there a broad awareness of this problem? What kind of role do different people in different sectors see for themselves with road safety? These sorts of things. So we're going to be working on change management, adaptive leadership, conflict management, really helping them advance within their organizations, between organizations, and within municipalities, advancing their safety programming. So with that, I'd like to thank you and recognize that this is funded by our Collaborative Sciences Center for Road Safety. There's our contact information. Should you wish to get in touch with us afterwards, please feel free to do that. I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us. And I guess we can take a few more questions at this time.
Yeah, I can address, it looks like the next question in the chat, Seth, around public health professionals.
Yeah.
We did find that public health was mentioned in 18 of the 26 plans, and 6 private health organizations were involved as well.
Yes, that's wonderful.
Actually, well, the question was is just sending where our Vision Zero planning guidance located, and it varies if you're meaning where it's housed. It could be in planning, engineering. It's not always in this. It depends on how the municipality is set up and where it is.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
San Francisco is a unique one, right, Kelly? I think their county health department, I believe, was operating the Vision Zero program there.
Oh, okay. Sorry,
yeah.
I misunderstood his question. So where the document is to create a Vision Zero plan. So if you search on CSCRS Vision Zero, you will come up on our project, and there's a link there to the guide to develop the plan. But I can also put it in the chat if I stop talking.
Yeah.
So I'll do that.
Yeah, we can share some of these things, and including actually one of the things Sarah O'Brien has asked us about the safe systems principles. A brief primer of what we mean by safe systems principles. So something Lewis mentioned earlier or asked about was the 4 safe systems principles. These are something that the Collaborative Sciences Center for Road Safety have sort of advanced over the last few years. The first one is basically around designing the system for humans. So it's adapting to the known sort of capabilities of people. So just in terms of human factors, roadway environments, but also just the way people are and how they're going to behave. Like if you think about where crossings are placed, if they might be too far away, people are going to cross where it's probably most convenient for them and most efficient. And then you have the second one is really a key one around managing kinetic energy or speed management. So all the ways that you can help manage the speeds, the kinetic energy. So that also involves vehicle design. So the larger, higher horsepower vehicles, we really want to start seeing more policy around that, maybe start curbing the trend toward higher, ever higher and higher, I guess, horsepower vehicles and larger vehicles. And then you get into cross-sectoral work, coordinating action and vision is one of them. And then another one, the last one would be treating road safety as the foundation of all transportation goals. So basically, right now we see a balancing act, right, of safety and all these other goals, access, economics, mobility. But safety we see as sort of the bottom of the pyramid. It's the foundation upon which you can have mobility and access and economic development, things like this. So those are kind of the 4 key principles, and we can certainly post those here as well. So Serge asked the question, and Jennifer's linked to the principles. Thank you, Jennifer. Did not see that. After Serge asked the question, but after achievement, they were able to maintain the 0 deaths. I suppose that's true, talking about Oslo, Norway. They approach basically the Nordic countries, the Dutch, the Danes, Germans, they treat road safety very differently. They have a lot of different policies. It's far more expensive to drive there, for instance. Their cars and roads are much smaller. Speed limits are usually lower. Automated speed enforcement's more ubiquitous. Safety infrastructure, likewise. There's just a lot of different differences, cultural differences, of course. So yeah, Chamai mentioned about looks like the Denver Council of Governments, talking about how Denver and the Denver Council of Governments, and as well as Indianapolis, MPO in Indianapolis, that they do coordinate their plans, or just not sure if they coordinate their plans.
Yeah, well, Denver is unique. It has, the city of Denver has a Vision Zero plan, as well as the Council of Governments around that subsumes Denver. So there are actually two plans for that area. So it's unique. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. That is sort of unique about them. That's a really good point, Shemai. Thank you for bringing that up. And so Lewis asked about the Vision Zero planning guidance again. I think we can.
Yeah, I put the link up. The link is there.
Looks like Elise put it up. It's up here several times. I think it might be a little misleading if you go to the website, because it's called the final report. It is sort of both serve a couple of functions. But yeah, you can see it, access it through the link there. It ends with VZ guide final. Jennifer mentions that we're offering 3 other webinars this week as part of UNC's Research Week, and has a link there. So please do check those out if interested. Let's see.
So
Nandy, sharing of guides. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like the next question, Nandy asks about ways that equity is being addressed in the North Carolina efforts.
Equity is being addressed mostly in planning processes, in prioritization processes. So thinking about when, like for instance, Charlotte's done a high injury network map, but they've also overlaid where they have lower income communities of color. And that's where they want to kind of privilege some of the engineering treatments. That's just an example of equity. And we see more of this too in sort of the participatory process. So with an understanding that traditionally disenfranchised or disengaged groups are going to be kind of centered in a lot of the upcoming or continuing planning processes. It's a great question, Andy. So Leah was wondering, can you speak to the role of the state in this work, state DOTs and others? Certainly some state DOTs are more involved than others. I don't know, Kelly, if you have anything from the planning side.
I'm not sure I can answer the question as it relates to plans, but then maybe you want to answer it in terms of North Carolina Vision Zero.
Sure.
But in terms of the plans, actually, they did not refer to their state plan very often, more so not. So 7 of the 26 plans did refer to their strategic highway safety plan. And there was one at the time, statewide Vision Zero plan that was mentioned in one of the 26. So I feel like there could be a lot more integration. We talk about integration of plans vertically within their municipality, but also horizontally. And I feel like there could be better integration between municipality and state, both ways.
Yeah, agreed, Kelly. Yeah, one of the things we did notice, there's a lot of that horizontal integration. It's wonderful to see all these sectors coming together and rallying around Vision Zero, safe systems approaches. There certainly are examples of municipalities that vertical integration, working more with their states and regions, as Leah just shared with Portland, Oregon and Oregon Metro. Strong overlap with the plans, the city and regional plans. So that's wonderful to hear that. I think the one case, Washington State seems to be sort of a leader in this regard. They have a Target Zero program, and their strategic highway safety program. Definitely recommend checking that out if interested. They do reference a lot of the Vision Zero planning happening in the municipalities in the state, and really do focus on equity, on sort of indigenous peoples, their Black communities, things of that nature. So it's a really wonderful example of a state plan that focuses on sort of Vision Zero. Eric Tang asked, we find that other state UTCs or general universities in a similar position as UNC to provide dedicated support for safety plans or visa development throughout a state. That is a fair question. I haven't been kind of keeping track of this too closely. I don't know if others on the call or webinar today know of other basically state universities providing, being a safety resource for the state, for Vision Zero development rather, not just a safety resource.
Yeah, Leah respond that she doesn't see it happening, but it should.
Yeah, Leah, I think, yeah, you're totally right. That's my read of this too. Certainly we know of other universities playing a sort of resource role that happens in Montana State, that happens in Texas, Michigan, Virginia. Those spring to mind, but we don't know of other states that are supporting Vision Zero programs very much. Yeah, UC Berkeley and SafeTrack, yeah, and they're our close colleagues in the CSCRS. So thank you for mentioning that, Leah. Yeah, they definitely. So I think that would be lovely to see that. We do see a nice role for a research institute like ours in this space, because then we can apply more directly a lot of the research, right, to practice, or at least help facilitate that process.
I really want to thank everyone for their participation. You made it a lot more fun, and we're winding down. So if there are any last questions.
The LTAP can also help. It's possible. And yeah, definitely echo Kelly. Thanks so much for joining us and posing such great questions and sharing links and ideas. It's been wonderful to see you all here and to engage with you in this way.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
All right. Jennifer, take it away.